The city never sleeps, it just changes its mask. By day, it's full of smiles and handshakes, contracts signed under warm lights, deals sealed over champagne. But at night, the same city whispers secrets in the rain, washing away sins no one dares to name. That's when I come alive. My name's Lucas Reed. Though most people at the firm stopped saying it years ago, I was once the youngest executive in Falcon Industries, the man who could turn ashes into gold. I built their empire brick by brick, number by number, while others took the credit. And then one day, they decided I was disposable. It started with whispers, the kind that crawl through offices like poison. Lucas isn't reliable. Maybe he's been embezzling. Strange how his numbers don't add up lately. Within a week, my reputation was gone. Within a month, I was fired. And within a year, Evan Blake, my so-called best friend, was sitting in my chair shaking hands with the board, giving my presentations. He smiled when I left that building for the last time. And I smiled back because he thought I'd lost. For a while, I disappeared. I moved into a one-room apartment above a garage, the kind that smells like gasoline and loneliness. I lived off cheap takeout and bitterness, watching the city lights from my window like a man looking at his past through glass. But here's the thing about being betrayed, it teaches you patience. It burns away the noise and leaves only focus. So while Evan climbed the ladder I built, I studied him. Every move, every word, every weakness. He became my project, my purpose. And tonight, 3 years later, I finally made my move. At 10:43 p.m., a single email left my laptop. No threats, no name, just one attachment. A file that would shatter his perfect world. As I watched the message send, I whispered the words I'd been saving for this moment. You took everything from me, Evan. Now I'll take everything from you. The city lights flickered outside my window, as if the whole skyline was holding its breath. The game had begun. I never believed in fireworks. I believed in the long burns, the patient wiring of cause and effect until the result is inevitable. If Evan thought I was going to scream and storm the office, he'd already won. Anger is a brass trumpet. It announces itself and dies. What I wanted was a clock you don't notice until it reads midnight. The email I sent at 10:43 was a scalpel. Attached were 3 folders, one with internal ledgers, one with expense reports bearing his initials, and one with a string of messages between him and a vendor nobody had heard of until 6 months ago. I didn't fabricate a thing. I learned years ago that truth, when curated properly, is not only convincing, it's lethal. I didn't send it to the press. I didn't leak it to friends. I sent it to the one place that would act without sentiment, the board's compliance inbox, routed through the firm's outside counsel. The firm had a reputation to protect. Reputations are allergic to uncertainty. When you feed certainty into the right machine, it grinds fast. After the send, I opened a bottle of something cheap and watched the rain stitch silver threads on my window. I pictured his face when HR pinged him at 7 in the morning. I pictured the polite knock at his door, the clipboard, the people in code gray suits. I felt nothing then but a fierce and romantic satisfaction. The first movement of the plan had been performed, but you don't win wars with a single email, no matter how sharp. You need friction. You need small, private collapses that look accidental. So I worked backward from their patterns. Evan was meticulous about 2 things, perception and convenience. He had a calendar for charm and a phone for avoidance. He loved to be visible at charity photos and invisible when questions arrived. That predictability is a treasure for someone who'd been exiled by betrayal. Predictability becomes a lever. I booked 2 modest items into his world: a consultant's routine review and a vendor audit for a small project he championed. Both would appear as innocuous: a compliance check, a quarterly reconciliation. But molecules of doubt spread by such items. The consultant would ask for documentation. The vendor would ask for copies of authorizations. The people on the inside who once nodded at his jokes would now need to read emails and sign attestations. Paperwork, once demanded, is merciless. Then there was the social infrastructure. People have private thresholds for embarrassment. I found Evans, a woman on his junior team, a quiet, precise, a junior analyst named Priya had once sent him a polite note about an unexplained payment and been brushed off. I reached out to her with the truth she'd been too frightened to believe aloud and the moral clarity she needed to act. I didn't coerce. I offered her proof, and she chose to hand it to HR, Watching someone who had been holding a silent worry finally speak was more satisfying than any shouting match I'd imagined. The next morning, the office smelled the way it does before a storm. Coffee cold, a dozen phones ignored. Evan answered my call on the second ring. His voice was practiced, smooth. "Lucas," he said. "How are you?" "Cold, careful." Not surprised to hear me, the way men maintain civility to hide fear. "Fine," I said. "You should check your inbox." There was a pause, a swallow. "What? Who sent?" "You'll find it. Let it do its work." I could hear him moving. Drawers opening, steps on tile. I could imagine the way his hands trembled, the quick breath he didn't want the lawyer to hear. He tried to call me back, then stopped. He sent me a string of texts with a tone I couldn't mistake. Damage control, charm in drafted form. None of it would help. Over the next week, the rhythm changed. Meetings multiplied. Evan's calendar filled with ad hoc sessions and calls with counsel. He wore that expensive suit all the time as if armor could be tailored. He moved in a haze of small crises while I moved like a man with a map. Every city block memorized. There were close calls. A project manager almost forwarded an invoice with a highlighted line that matched one from my folder. I emailed the manager, calmly suggesting a double check. The manager rescinded the forward, claiming a misread. The thing about near misses is they speed you up. They force a target to make quick decisions, and quick decisions are where mistakes hide. Outside the office, I refined the show. I attended a conference Evan was speaking at, sitting 3 rows back in a dark jacket. He looked 5 pounds lighter and 10 years older on that stage. His voice had the clipped rhythm of a man reciting talking points. He fielded questions like a soldier deflecting grenades. Afterward, he moved quickly through the crowd, muttering gratitude to faces that had been friendly for years. I took a picture from the hall and sent it to a private list I'd built, investors and ex-clients who'd been burned. The message was simple: watch this space. Things that seem like coincidence pile up into narrative. People begin to stitch together the parts they once ignored. A vendor with a minor grievance posts a careful note on a professional forum. A compliance officer notices duplicated memo numbers. An internal auditor newly empowered by the council's first look asks for backup files. The machine hums. It always hums when fed facts. For all of this, I kept my face fixed as the man who'd been wronged, quiet, composed, almost generous. Sympathy is a currency in corporate circles. People give opportunities to tragedy. That currency bought me access to heirs I needed: old mentors, board members once indifferent, auditors who respected process. I fed them the right questions and let them ask. Revenge at this stage isn't dramatic. It's lithe and surgical. It's confidence one day and silence the next. You do not need to break a person's will. You need to rearrange the world so he breaks himself against it. On the 7th day after the mail, HR called Evan quietly into a meeting. I watched from 3 blocks away as his car idled, the hazard lights blinking like a slow heartbeat. When he left the building that afternoon, the board had asked him to step aside at least until an independent review could be completed. He looked as if someone had taken the color out of him. He tried to meet my eyes as he passed the lobby but turned away like a man who'd been taught the art of avoidance and suddenly had nowhere left to hide. It is a strange sensation to be both the architect and a spectator. The plan had teeth, it bit, but it also revealed something I had not known fully: the cost of being the man who pulls the strings. Each move tightened a knot inside me I hadn't felt before, the knowledge that I'd entered a place where silence and ruin were tools I could wield. I thought of the first night I left, the cheap apartment, and the hunger that had kept me alive. That hunger had curdled into purpose. Now purpose had its own shadow, and it stretched longer than I expected. They teach you in business school that pressure reveals character. What they don't teach you is how pressure reveals truth slowly, like steam through a cracked pipe until the whole system has to either vent or explode. After Evan was asked to step aside, the office changed tone. Where there had been laughter and light chatter, there were whispers and clipped calls. People who once brushed his shoulder now avoided his corridor entirely. Investors asked for reconciliations in tones that implied they'd already decided where guilt landed. The board moved like an organism, calm, efficient, fatal. I didn't celebrate. You don't celebrate when the thing you set in motion is a person. I watched. I cataloged. I measured. There was a macabre pride like watching a patient come out of anesthesia and seeing the surgeon's sutures hold, but it was edged with something else, in knowledge that once you remove a foundation, the collapse will scar the whole neighborhood. Evan's mistakes began small and inevitable. He delegated approvals he once handled himself. He demanded numbers from underlings who suddenly feared turning their screens toward him. He called me twice that week, voice brittle under practice charm. "Lucas," he said, like he was testing whether my name still carried warmth. "I need your help." "Can you?" He stopped himself. "Then, can we talk?" The old reflex was there, the sucker punch of empathy he'd used on clients, the way he could turn a critic into an ally with a laugh. I let the phone go to voicemail. A junior analyst named Priya became my most useful ally without knowing it. She had the kind of integrity you don't teach a low, fierce zero tolerance for irregularities. She'd brought her concerns to HR weeks before and had been shrugged off. When I showed up at her desk quiet, unassuming, with a folder of corroborating entries and an open invitation to pass them on, she did what frightened people sometimes do when someone hands them safety. She acted. The papers moved. The auditors requested backups. The facts stacked. And facts do not bend to charisma. The pressure that broke men isn't always public fury. It's the drip of inconvenience: accounts frozen, flights rescheduled, calls ignored. For Evan it became a claustrophobia, the sensation of standing in a glass elevator as it slowly descends. He improvised. Improvisation looks brave until it is recorded. He pleaded with vendors, flattered board members, tried to conjure goodwill the way a magician pulls scarves from sleeves. But people watching for movement read the desperation. Desperation produces errors. There were moments that pried at me. Once, late at night, I saw him in the lobby through the building's glass, bareheaded, coat slung over his shoulder, the posture of a man who had been grounded. He looked like a character in a story I'd once admired, brilliant, flawed, doomed. I thought of the nights we'd planned expansion over pizza, of the joke about having more than we knew what to do with. Guilt is not a single thing. It is layered. For a second, the man I hated and the boy I'd shared beers with were the same silhouette. Then he turned away and left the frame. The public beats kept accruing. A respected journalist reached out, claiming an anonymous source and an appetite for truth. I fed the reporter a factually solid excerpt from a ledger, dry, verifiable, devastating in its ordinariness. He ran a piece that read the way a small, clean blade does: precise, surgical. The article didn't scream. It presented documents and asked questions. But questions are predators. They go to the places people cannot answer without admitting liability. Evan's allies thinned. One after another, people who had once laughed at his jokes sent brief notes citing conflict of interest or reputational risk. One partner quietly removed his endorsement from a proposal. Contracts stalled. The office morale that had fed his ego dwindled into an avoidance that felt like social quarantine. You can tell the health of a career by the lunch invitations it receives. His inbox changed from dinner offers to terse legal requests. Meanwhile, I kept my face. I held to the persona of the wrong man who'd watched his world burn and quietly rebuilt a life. That was part of the weapon: expectation. They expected fury, a press conference, angry confrontations. Instead, I offered steady answers and practical help. I sat in meetings and spoke only when facts demanded comment. The more composed I looked, the more surreal the contrast with Evan's fraying dignity. People equate calm with competence. It was a currency I spent liberally, but every chess master knows the endgame is a lonely place. The plan demanded a final squeeze, something that would make his return impossible, that would close the loop. For weeks I saved one card, a dossier compiled with the patient cruelty of someone who had learned how to wait. It contained bank routes, correspondence, timestamps, and one particular piece of evidence so mundane it would be dismissed if discovered alone, and fatal when placed in context. Context is a cruelty I respect. It makes the guilty look like the only plausible authors of their fate. Before I used the dossier, there was another gamble. The company, like any animal, has instincts for survival. It would prefer to scapegoat and continue. If the board could spin this as a leadership lapse and move on, my work would have been a temporary win. I needed the board to understand that this was not a lapse but a pattern. So I arranged for the counsel I'd quietly engaged months ago to deliver a timeline that matched my files, uncanny in its clarity, implacable in its logic. Legalese is a language that buries hope. When lawyers say referral, a man's life takes a legal direction. On the night I handed over the dossier, I didn't watch the news or call friends. I sat alone in my apartment, the window a black mirror. There was no triumph in the quiet, only the thinning out of something I once called certainty. A plan had been executed. A man I once trusted had been unmade. The city spun on, indifferent. What I did feel, underneath everything, was the first real taste of what would come after. Not the applause of justice served, but the silence that follows a storm. It has a weight that sits in your chest like a warning bell. I had built a machine of consequence, and its engine now ran on the lives it had touched. The victory I sought had been achieved in the small hours of paper and quiet. The question that remained, one that would not go away, was whether the man I'd become in the pursuit of that victory would be someone I could live beside when the dust finally settled. Revenge, for all its heat, cools the closer you stand to it. The closer I came to finishing what I'd started, the colder everything felt: my pulse, my thoughts, even the air around me. What began as a fire had turned into a quiet precision, like an executioner polishing his blade before dawn. Evan was unraveling. You could see it in his clothes, first wrinkled, mismatched. In his eyes, that restless darting between people who no longer looked back. His swagger had dissolved into something pathetic, desperate. He'd always been the kind of man who could sell air to a drowning man, but now every word he spoke smelled of panic. When the investigation became public, it wasn't explosive, it was worse. It was slow. The kind of story that doesn't trend for a day and vanish, but festers. The media used words like breach of trust and internal mismanagement. Not one headline said criminal, not yet. But they didn't need to. The public doesn't read details. It reads tone. And the tone was poisoned. He called me again. I didn't answer. Then, a day later, he showed up at my apartment. The sight of him through the peephole made my stomach twist, not from fear, but from recognition. This was the same man who once stood beside me when we pitched our first investors, who laughed so hard we spilled coffee on the contract. Now, he looked like something the world had chewed up and spit out. "Lucas, please," he said when I finally opened the door. "You have to believe me. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I can fix it." His voice cracked halfway through. I said nothing. I let him fill the silence, because silence is the mirror that forces people to see what they've become. He tried again. Words tumbling over each other, explanations, excuses, half apologies that never reached the heart. Finally, I said, quietly, "You didn't mean for it to happen. Or you didn't mean to get caught." He froze. The smallest muscles in his jaw tightened, that same twitch I'd seen the day he signed the deal that erased me from the company's history. "Lucas, I'm not your enemy. You made me one." For a second, his mask cracked. The calm, the polished grin, the charm all gone. "You don't understand. This was bigger than us. There were pressures. People you don't know, people I don't know didn't forge my signature on a contract." I interrupted. "People I don't know didn't call the board behind my back and tell them I'd lost focus. That was you." He stood there, chest heaving, searching for some version of the past that would make this less ugly. There wasn't one. There never is. When he finally left, he looked smaller somehow, as if the world had decided he'd already been judged. And he was just waiting for the sentence to catch up. The next week, the company's legal team sent out an official statement. "Evan Brooks has resigned due to personal and ethical concerns." It was clean, sanitized, like they'd wiped his name off the whiteboard and replaced it with the word transition. But I wasn't done. The story couldn't end with a resignation. He'd stolen years of my work, my reputation, and turned them into stepping stones for his own success. He didn't just need to fall, he needed to understand why he was falling. So I sent him an email. Anonymous, short, 5 words: "You built this." I watched. That same night, I left a package at his office door, a printed copy of every internal message he'd hidden, every invoice rerouted, every falsified number. No signature, no explanation, just the truth, bound in black. By the next morning, the rumors weren't whispers anymore. They were wildfire. The story leaked in full, and for the first time, even his remaining defenders had nothing left to say. The board called an emergency meeting. Investors pulled out. The stock fell. And Evan, the man who once stood on stages in $1,000 suits preaching about vision and trust, was suddenly a ghost in his own empire. I watched it all unfold from my living room. Coffee in hand, heart steady. There was no laughter, no thrill. Only a strange calm. The kind that follows a storm. The air still electric. The silence heavier than thunder. But when the first interviewer, Evan, disheveled, eyes sunken, muttering about betrayal from within, something inside me shifted. I thought it would feel like victory. It didn't. It felt like looking into a mirror and seeing a face I barely recognized. The revenge was complete, almost perfect except for the one thing I hadn't planned for. The realization that in destroying him, I had destroyed the last part of myself that once believed in forgiveness. And in that moment, watching his career collapse live on national television, I realized the story wasn't over, because the thing about revenge is, it never stops where you think it will. There's a strange kind of silence that comes after revenge, the kind that feels like standing in the wreckage of a house you once called home. Everything's quiet, but it's not peace. It's just absence. Weeks passed. Evan disappeared from every circle we'd ever shared. His social media accounts went dark. His apartment emptied overnight. The news moved on, as it always does, to fresher scandals and brighter tragedies. But I couldn't shake the ghost of it all. Some nights, I'd find myself scrolling through old photos of the two of us standing in front of the first office we rented, smiling like idiots. We had no money, no plan, but we had each other. There was a time when that felt unbreakable. Now, all that remained was a trail of digital dust and a story I couldn't tell anyone. Because who would I be in that story? The betrayed friend? The avenger? Or the man who became everything he swore to destroy? One evening, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was him. His voice was hollow, like someone speaking from the bottom of a well. "Lucas," he said quietly. "You won." I didn't say anything. He continued. "I lost everything. My job, my house. People crossed the street to avoid me. But I need you to know something. I didn't hate you. Not even at the end. I just wanted to be more. By stepping on me." I asked, able to stop the bitterness from creeping in. He sighed, long and tired. "By surviving. You don't know what it's like when you realize the world doesn't care about good intentions, and just results. You were the better man, Lucas. You always were. That's why I did it." The line went silent for a few seconds. Then he said, "I hope you find peace." "I never will." And the call ended. I sat there for a long time, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to nothing but static. For the first time in months, my hands were shaking, not from anger, but from something worse, regret. I walked to the window. Outside, the city pulsed with light and motion, and caring, and stoppable. Somewhere out there, Evan was just another forgotten man in a sea of broken stories. And I, the one who had orchestrated his downfall, was left with a hollow victory and a heart that wouldn't quiet down. The next morning, I went to the office for the first time since everything had ended. My name was on the wall again, Lucas Hayes, founder and CEO. People greeted me with smiles, congratulations, even admiration. But every handshake felt heavier. Every well done sounded like an echo of something lost. Because deep down, I knew the truth. I hadn't won. Not really. I just traded one form of betrayal for another, his betrayal of friendship for my betrayal of conscience. That night, I sat alone in my apartment and poured a drink. On the table lay a photo of us, Evan and me, taken the day we launched the company. Two men chasing dreams, blind to the shadows that would one day consume them. I raised the glass. "Here's to you, old friend," I whispered. "You taught me what trust costs, and what revenge takes." The whiskey burned down my throat, sharp and unforgiving. I thought about deleting the file, all the evidence, all the messages, all the proof that had ended him. But I didn't. I just closed the laptop and left it there, like a tombstone for a past I could never exhume. Outside, the city hummed alive, indifferent, eternal. And for the first time, I realized the real revenge wasn't destroying him. It was learning to live with what I'd done.